Hello, my name is Andrew Martin, and welcome to another edition of In the Artist's Words from the William Campbell Contemporary Gallery in Fort Worth. Today I'm joined by the artist Tom Hollenback. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you.
And we're going to take a look at his show at the William Campbell Contemporary Gallery, and it's called Mutabilis.
That's correct.
But first, let's get to know Tom a little bit up close and personal. He has crisscrossed the country from his birthplace in New Orleans over the course of his lifetime. I've lost track of all the places that he's been, but suffice it to say that he's been from his birthplace in New Orleans all the way to Alaska, by his family's, growing up early on in his age, by his family's Airstream, I believe, you mentioned. And then he eventually would settle in Texas and go to school at the University of Oklahoma, where he studied, somewhat improbably enough, Asian studies. And then there was a time when he lived in Los Angeles, and he practiced sort of arts and crafts by developing his skills initially as a jewelry maker. He was involved in Los Angeles in the 1980s, and then eventually he moved to Santa Fe, which of course, as we all know, is a great sort of art scene, and was doing a lot of art, and was working in a gallery there. And then he eventually ended up in the Austin area, where Tom worked in a .com, and eventually made his way to graduate studies at the University of Texas at San Antonio, where he graduated in 2005, if I'm not mistaken, with a master's in fine art with a specific sort of a study of sculpture, and which is very appropriate because we're going to look at his most recent output of work today at the William Campbell Contemporary Gallery, where this is your second single-person show at the gallery, but you're a longtime fixture of the gallery in Fort Worth. And let's talk about this first bit of work, which is fascinating. First, let's tell the viewers about the materials used for this particular work and what was your inspiration for it.
This particular body of work, I use mainly construction materials. The metal is, this particular one is elevator channel that I use to form the containing box structure for it. And the fluorescent plexi, I am really particularly interested in that light quality that it does possess, is used in signage a lot. And so I am just kind of using those materials to this end.
How did you come across these materials, or were they literally found objects for you, or?
Oh, I just always have an eye out for different materials, and I started with just regular metal construction studs, and so that's what most of these channels are made of, is regular construction studs. This is a little bit unusual.
The name of the show is Mutabilis, yes? And right. I hear mutation in that word, which from my dictionary means change. Mm-hmm. And what is the underlying theme of this work and others in terms of change?
Well, I suppose for me, the show, the titling at that was that this is kind of a snapshot of my current studio practice, and it does kind of include a number of different bodies of work and kind of the evolution from one to another. But it's all in constant dialogue back and forth among this body and that body and this body. So that's really what the genesis of that title is.
Wonderful. Let's move on to the next work.
All right.
Tom, let's talk about these works.
Okay.
And let's talk about process. What went into making them?
Well, they start out with a wood mold that I'll construct, and then there is a release agent on them. These take a very long time to dry, so it may be up to a year. sometimes a little longer, sometimes a little less. I lose most of them because they do not actually completely fill the way that I expect them to, or there's some other issues with the cast itself. When they have sufficiently dried, then I do remove the mold, and sometimes bits and pieces stick or tear off. And at first I was really horrified that that happened, and then I was always trying to clean them up, get them neat and tidy. And I realized that this really added a lot, and that I became increasingly interested in having those things happen. So I would purposely not coat the mold completely, or I would, when I removed it, I would try and fracture the wood as much as I could and see what would happen. I also have been using plaster also to create molds, and that dries really quickly. And but sometimes it doesn't release either completely, and parts of the mold stick. So again, I really like those bits and pieces that end up being part of it. So I just incorporated them. And like a traditional painting, they do have a support structure, but I turned them into a horizontal shelf rather than the vertical canvas or wood paneling you would normally associate with pigment on that field. So I've kind
There's
of
a real
subverted that.
three-dimensionality to it with that
Right.
that kind of canvas.
Mm-hmm. So that's basically how that's unfolded.
Wonderful. Shall we move on to the next one?
Sure.
Tom, let's talk about this wonderful, very, very evocative work. It's called Trondheim Lines for Purple, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
What is the origin of that name?
Well, I had a chance to do a residency in Norway a couple of summers ago, and I had proposed to do the cast paint pieces, but I also realized that for the 1 month that I would be there, I would not really have time to complete that. I did start the plaster cast pieces, and that's where those that we had recently just seen came from that exploration too. But I started trying to do something a little bit different with paint as well, and so I stretched long pieces of foil on the studio floor. It was a really wonderful studio in an old building there that interested me as well. And I started just making marks with the paint, just pouring the paint out, scooting across the floor. And some of these are really quite long, maybe up to 8-9 feet long. And after they dried, which they dried very quickly, I would peel them off that surface and then start hanging them on the wall. And it was that relationship of the marks made with the architecture itself that really interested me. And so by floating them off slightly and pinning them to the walls, that slight perforation of the wall itself, to me, that context is really important to read these pieces, almost as something emanating from the wall, seeping out of the wall in a sense. So,
Did you create them in Norway?
yes.
Was there something inspirational to you about being in Norway that helped your creative process?
I think it was just being very alert to the history of the place that was fascinating to me. Something that old, just encountering that on a day-to-day basis was really pretty fascinating. And certainly I overlaid it with my own sense of what that history of the architecture would be, and just my own interests. So it's certainly totally fabricated in that sense, but important to me that it be done in that context.
Absolutely. Shall we move on to the final word?
Sure.
Tom, let's talk about this work. It's called SPWP1. My curiosity is killing me. What is the significance of that, the name for this work?
It's actually very descriptive. Self-portrait wood panel number 1. But these are sort of an evolution of the paint line, Trondheim line pieces. They're done with a flatbed scanner as a means of capturing the image. And yes, I do open the scanner, stick my head in, close my eyes, and take the images. So that's why they distort the way they do. What's really close to the screen gets captured in better detail, and just moving slightly away from it, the image does start to dissolve. And that really, to me, is an interesting aspect of this. And then I start, I don't manipulate the images very much at all. I'll desaturate color and maybe adjust the lightness and darkness, or burn out little spots of dust that are on the bed of the scanner. But that's about all I'll do with that. And then I do mount them on either aluminum panels or wood. The aluminum panels are the height of the subject, in this case me. Then I do start pouring veils of transparent, translucent acrylic paint over, and start to obscure that a little bit more with that. Usually there's some sort of light interference or iridescence that gets added to the body of paint that I pour over.
You mentioned that you used a scanner for this particular work. Is that tricky to sort of incorporate a piece of machinery like that into your art?
Not particularly. It's actually very easy and very immediate, and it's every day. I use very low resolution, so I can do it in more or less one continuous scan. The higher the resolution, the more it stops, and I can't stand still for very long with my face in that, so any movement gets recorded also, and the image will tend to fracture a little bit. So the lower the res, the cleaner the image in one or two sweeps. So
I feel that there's a sculptural quality to this particular work with those lines, and they emerge off the.
Mm-hmm. There is. Most of the surface is covered, but there's usually a little bit of paper that is left too, and to me that's also important, as I generally prefer that immediate access to whatever the material is. I float them off the wall. That does give them a little bit more of an object quality to them as well. So that's where the sculpture background comes in, I suppose.
Wonderful, wonderful. Tom, thank you so much for joining us today on In the Artist's Words from the William Campbell Contemporary Gallery in Fort Worth. I'm Andrew Martin. Thank you again.
Thank you.